Line's good.
Never on.
Whoa.
Hard. Release.
Come on, Brent. Line's good. Got real close. The hair high, right? Try and hit 2/3.
Have they saved it for her? Yes, they have.
Welcome to Game of Stones, everybody. I am a very tinny Sean Graham Scott alongside, as always. Hello, Scott.
Hello. How is that tin can that you're speaking to me through?
Yeah, a bit of an incident earlier this evening trying to set up my mic. Almost burned myself on the cord. I don't know what's going on, but my mic, Scott, might be off to the podcast studio in the sky.
Well, Sean, you got a good, dozen years out of that mic?
Yeah,
that's pretty good. Pretty good. And so, next time we might even have better audio. Who knows?
Yeah, we'll see what happens on that. But I will try to make a change. So I do apologize for the tinniness of the sound on my end this week. But we wanted to get this one out to you because we had a guest join us earlier this evening, author of a new book for beginners. It's John Robertson. The book is entitled Curling for Beginners and Improvers, in which John goes through a variety of things that curlers need to know, should know, things that if you're new to the sport, you need to know, like what is the house? How do you score? What is the etiquette? What are the general rules? And for people who are improving, basic ideas for drills to do when you're out practicing, terminologies, ways to improve your strategy, even has a section on directional sweeping. So it's not just for the beginner, but people who've played for a while can get something out of this book, Scott. And we've talked for about a month of maybe we should do something of Curling 101. And some of the teams on social media are doing it. But we talk about getting people into buildings and trying the sport. A book like this is a great way to get somebody potentially interested in the sport without even having to get them in the building.
Absolutely. So the way that I think of this is it's sort of designed to supplement your first learn to curl session, right? You get thrown a whole bunch of terms, ideas, concepts during your learn to curl, and you think, oh man, this is all really cool. And then, you remember 10% of it because that's sort of what we do. But then you can go and pick up John's book, and it's sort of got everything that you need if you ever need to go back and say, what was that thing that we were taught about balance? What's that thing about the way you turn the rocks? What are they called? All that kind of stuff. So it's like super comprehensive, really, really good resource. Yeah. And so we took a look at it and decided we'd want to talk to John.
Yeah. So as I said, John was nice enough to join us earlier tonight. So without any further ado, let's get right into our discussion with John Robertson.
So we're here with John Robertson, author and curler of a new book for beginners and improvers. John, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So you emailed us that you are writing a new book about curling for beginners and for improvers. Can you tell us a little bit about the book?
Yeah, so it's really kind of what's on the tin there. So the book is intended to be an introduction for somebody who might not have the opportunity to take a Learn to Curl class, or more importantly, if you've taken that Learn to Curl program at your local club, and then you want to refine those skills, because as you're out there, they're throwing a lot of stuff at you, and then you kind of want to go back and review it. And it's great to have a resource where you've got all of that laid out there. And also I try to explain why, I've got a little bit of a physics background, so I like to explain kind of why we do the things we do, why we want that foot right, nice and centered under our center of gravity, why we try to separate out the components of the curling delivery so that we're not just sitting in the hack and chucking it right from there, rather than doing this whole ridiculous thing where we slide out on the ice and then let go of the rock. So try to explain some of that. Try to explain some of the parts that we don't often teach very well in Learn to Curl, like sweeping. Although I am myself typically a skip, so you got to take my sweeping advice with a little bit of a grain of salt. Mm-hmm. And then just sort of introduce some people to some of the culture. Again, there'll be a little bit of limitation there because I'm an Ontario-based curler, so I mostly know the Ontario-based curling culture. And I have been told that it is a little different from province to province and country to country.
You were inspired to write this book. What's a little bit of your curling background?
So I've been curling since I was in Little Rocks myself. So I started at 12, did 1 year of Little Rocks, and then Bantams and Juniors. Took a little bit of time off during university and then got back into it. So I've got about 25 or so years of cumulative curling experience as a recreational curler. I've never curled competitively. I did try out for varsity back in university and got cut in the very first round of cuts. So that's sort of where I am. And I'm also a NCCP club coach, which is, if you're not familiar with the various levels of coaching that NCCP offers, it's the very lowest level. So I'm qualified as a coach, but not at the super high competitive level. So most of my experience in teaching other curlers is teaching them for their little fun spiels if they've got like a corporate event where they're coming out and they're trying curling for the first time, or helping curlers with our Learn to Curl program, or volunteering with our Little Rock program. So mostly helping beginner curlers learn how to curl, and then curling myself at the recreational level.
And that's a great experience in getting to lead those Learn to Curls or corporate events, in getting to understand what people actually need to be able to do it, right? The more you do it, the more you'll recognize, I forgot to tell them this thing, or they're asking more questions about this. And so over the time, you collect all those tips and tricks, and it seems like putting it in a book is a great idea.
Yeah, and trying to like really focus on where some people will start to go wrong and try to bring it right back in the narrative of the book. Like, don't forget the foot goes right under the center mass, because how many hundreds of times have I seen someone try to keep the foot out like in line with their hip or their shoulder, and then basically fall as soon as they let go of the rock, because the only way to hold yourself up at that point is to be leaning on the rock as another point of support.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Our first game was Monday. Scott, you couldn't play because you were not feeling great, but two people fell, of very experienced players. So, yeah, it happens all the time for sure that people don't have the right positioning. But, John, I'm wondering, in putting it together, because it really does go from the basics of what are the rules, how do you score, like what are the rings called, to strategy. Like, so how do you figure out what the balance is, and how do you walk the line between, obviously it's for new players and improving players, but it does go a little deeper into some stuff that even experienced players could get something out of the book.
Well, absolutely. And that's where that second part of the title comes from, that and improvers. So people who've got some experience but are looking to improve their game a little bit. So I do go into strategy toward the back of the book, and it's mostly with the lens of helping someone who's never really been a skip or a vice before get into that role. So someone who's, that 5U sort of crowd where they've got some experience, but it's mostly been that they've been playing lead or second, and their idea of strategy is throw the rock at wherever the skip puts the broom down. And so it's trying to bring in that idea of, how do you even put the broom down? What does it mean to take a certain amount of ice? If you put the broom down here and the rock goes to the center line, how far in do you have to move the broom to get the rock to go a foot to the right of the center line or a foot to the left of the center line? And sort of start to even just think about those basic concepts of how do you then start to actually play the game as a skip. And then, when you've got hammer, what does hammer mean? Why is it an advantage to have the last rock? Why is it a disadvantage to not have the last rock? How is our, sort of counterintuitive naming scheme for shots and curling relate to the concepts of offense and defense, or these very basic concepts? But I don't get really deep into the strategy. So there are entire books and YouTube channels and all that are dedicated to the strategy of curling. Like, it is often called chess on ice because the strategy can be so deep and so important to the game. And I really don't get into that because I'm trying to keep it at that recreational, sort of relatively new curler level for recreational curlers. So we're not going to be suggesting a strategy where they have to worry about making a triple in off from a guard way out on the wings, or some of those shots that you'll see on TV that just don't happen at the club level. And so even like double takeouts, that was one where I was on the fence about including, and I did not actually include it in the book, is like, how do you line up a double takeout? So I kind of felt regret as soon as I sent the book to print. I was like, should I have put that back in? And so up on the website, that's included up there as a bonus chapter, is a little bit of information on how you line those up as preview. So then if you want to check that out, you can also see like what my writing style is like. So there's a little bit of humor in there, a little bit of education, some little diagrams made up.
Yeah, Sean says this book includes everything sort of soup to nuts. What for you what would you say is like the most important chapter for a new curler? Is it going to be the very beginning, sort of what is curling? Or is there something that they could get a little bit more out of if they're going on the ice for one time only?
Yeah, I think it really does sort of progress through so that if you're just starting, you're probably going to want to start with the first little bit of the book, which is talking about what curling is, what are all these lines on the ice, and then how do you actually deliver the stone. And then we work into how do you work together as a team? What does it mean to like make a call? How do you listen to the skip? What does the skip holding their arm out to this side or that side mean? And what does it mean when they raise the broom up over their head? And then it gets into sweeping, which if you're a relatively new sweep curler, you're going to do a lot of that. And then into directional sweeping, which is a relatively new thing still in the sport. Not a lot of people understand it. Even within the sort of higher echelon of curlers and coaches, like there's a lot of discussion and debate still in the various podcasts and the seminars that Curling Ontario puts on and whatnot about exactly how does directional brushing work? How do you do it best? And so I present a couple of different theories. I'm partial to the scratch theory myself, in particular for the recreational equipment, which is also another factor that people have to bear in mind, is that sometimes on these higher level discussions where they're talking about how might directional sweeping work, they're often focused on the very specialized equipment that gets used at the competitive level, whereas at the recreational level, we're still using the equipment where this directional sweeping effect was discovered, because it's the more durable club level equipment, which does have that capability of potentially making those micro scratches in the ice.
I'm a proponent of that too, having curled with somebody that might have been able to, through no fault of their own, provide some extra scratching pressure to the ice surface often. But I digress about that. I see that you talked in the book about equipment. Can you tell me a little bit about the importance of equipment for new curlers?
Yeah, for sure. So the book talks about what might make a decent shoe. So in particular, looking at like slider thickness. Shoes come with a variety of slider thicknesses, and some of them are pitched as sort of more beginner because they're a slower slider. Whereas some people, I would argue as well, but I know that people have differing opinions on this. Some people argue you should go for the thickest, fastest slider you can right out of the gate. The learning curve will be steeper, which is why it's not marketed as a beginner slider, but then it'll last you longer, and then your game will pick up relatively quickly to the level of where your footwear is. Likewise, talking about things like grippers. Grippers are very important for being safe on the ice and for actually being able to play the game. And if you're standing around, like skipping, if you're sweeping with two grippers on, or if you're using a stick to deliver and using two grippers, you're going to need those grippers. And they have a lifespan. And that's something that maybe not a lot of people know, that your shoes might last for 5 or even 10 years. Or if you're a grad student like me and trying to stretch every last dime, and you squeeze 15 years out of your pair of shoes until they're like really falling apart, you might get quite a number of years out of them. But the shoes can last a lot longer than the grippers do. The grippers, for someone who's playing like once a week, might only get 1 year of use out of them. If they're playing multiple times a week, they might not even get a full season out of a gripper. They do need to be replaced fairly often, and they're wear items. We talk about brooms a little bit in terms of the different brooms that are out there are quite competitive, so you don't necessarily have to immediately go for one brand over the other, but they have differences. And I even made a note in the book that this is the section that's probably going to age the poorest, because who knows what innovations in broom technology will happen next. But just talking about how it's going to feel different in your hand if you have a hard line that's going to taper down toward the bottom, whereas a Balance Plus is going to taper the opposite way, and a gold line will be straight all the way through.
Yeah, I'm curious too. One of the things that you talk about is the delivery of a stone. And you write the way that I was taught, 10 o'clock or 2 o'clock, and go back to 12 o'clock, essentially, as you let it go. That's how I was taught to throw as well. I'm curious, how do you write that, though? I mean, that's just something, like, it's one of these things where, like, even trying to explain it to somebody when I'm at the office, it's hard to explain that. I know you have photos in the book that goes through it, but that's one of those things I think you have to kind of do it. So when you're sitting down to write how to deliver a curling stone, how do you even just begin to try to approach that?
Yeah, and that has been a challenge is for some of this where the format I think works really well for some things, like being able to structure the entire sort of journey from delivering a stone to sweeping to understanding the strategy and the various equipment. But then the format works against us for some things where it'd be really nice to have a video. So at the back of the book, I do mention some other resources. So, for example, Curl Up with Jamie. She's got a YouTube, that's Jamie Sinclair's YouTube channel. She's got a lot of great resources. So sometimes if you're reading it and you don't quite get the explanation from the book, you can go and you can find a video on YouTube. But at least then you kind of can piece in where that little 3-minute video on releases is going to fit into the bigger picture of how you're going to deliver it. So yeah, so basically, get back to your actual question of how do you explain that, is try to just explain visually and talking about what your body is doing. So moving that wrist, trying to move just the handle and the wrist without moving the rock off the line, talking about rotating the rock around its center so that you're separating out that rotation part from the direction that you're trying to move the rock toward that skips room. Use some photos to help sort of orient the reader to what you're talking about and the positions that you're talking about with the hands, and hope that it'll fuse together in the reader's mind. And I don't 100% know if I was successful. I had a couple of beta readers read through it. They all said that it made sense and was great. Maybe you read it and you were like, no, nobody's going to get this because it's so hard to explain in text. So sometimes you hope you did a good job, and some things are going to be more challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to me, I read over parts of it, and it seems like it makes a lot of sense to me. And I think the real test would be somebody that doesn't know anything about curling, giving it a read and seeing if it made sense to them. So you said you had a couple of beta readers, as you mentioned. Like, what other sort of help did you get in writing this book?
Well, one thing that's helped a lot is that this book sort of was written almost accidentally. So it's kind of a funny story because, how does a book happen accidentally? And it's because I didn't actually originally set out to write a book. We had launched a new league at our home club of Unionville Curling Club in Unionville, Ontario. And that was intended to be a league for, kind of like the title suggests, beginners and improvers. It was called Open Tag, open meaning any gender can come and join. The teams would not be restricted in how they could make up. It could be 4 men, 4 women, any combination in between. And tag means that we have like little name tags and a board where we would assign the teams, and we just scramble the names up. So every week you're playing with a different group of people. Teams are different every week. People even have the option to change positions week to week so they can try out the different positions, and that would help encourage some of our curlers who hadn't really played skip or vice in other leagues to give it a whirl in a more casual setting. And it would allow our people who are fresh out of Learn to Curl to get some more practice, to see how the game is played. And that was part of it, is that we wanted to give a home for those people coming out of Learn to Curl, because it's sometimes hard to get into a league, especially those team entry leagues where you have to have a foursome before you even get admitted to the league. And so this way it was easy to come in, easy to join. You just sign up individually. We allowed people to sign up partway through the year because, again, we're mixing the teams up week to week, so they can join at any point, and then we'll find a spot for them. And then the idea is, because it was for, there was a mix of some experienced curlers, including some competitive curlers, but we had that mix with all of those beginners and improvers. And so I was sending out a weekly email tip every week, just like, hey, you just got out of Learn to Curl. Let's review this step of the delivery. Next week, we'll do this step of the delivery, that step. And then now let's talk about some sweeping. And, I saw this scenario in the game. Let's remember how it works that, to get through a port, you can kind of get through with one turn a lot easier than you can get through the other turn if the rocks are staggered a little bit, et cetera, et cetera. Just talking about all those concepts. And I don't, write short emails, as you can tell by the fact that I'm just rambling on and on with this question. These are long emails that I'm sending every week. And I'm like, these are optional emails. They're to help you. They're to be like sort of for development. So I was also getting some feedback from people week to week about how well that was working, so that I could sort of flag in my mind any that had to be rewritten when this eventually came down to the book. And so, of course, at the end of the year, I made a joke that I've been saving all these emails so that I can reuse them in a future year, just throwing them all in a Word doc. And we're up like over 30,000 words now. This is almost book length, guys. So thank you for putting up with me through the year, just completely jamming your inbox full of tips. And then, of course, someone immediately writes back, you should make it an actual book. Like, you're almost there. And so that over the spring and summer, that's exactly what I did.
Nice.
It's a really good idea to have something like this, especially at this time where the business models are changing in curling clubs and all over Canada, the United States, at least. We're looking at ways to bring in new players. So in your experience in these leagues, bringing new people in, what are some of the core things that people need to be engaged with the sport and to come back over and over again? And how does the book start to address those things?
So there's quite a number of things, and I think that I hope I did a good job with addressing them in the book. So like the first one is just accepting people in, just wherever they happen to be in their curling journey or their curling abilities, to make a home for them. Like, we want them there. We want them out there playing with us. This is not the Slams. This is not the Briar or the Scotties. So there's going to be a lot of shots missed, and we're going to be very understanding, especially in that league where it's explicitly for people who are fresh out of Learn to Curl to come in and play with us. And that was something that, like, we set the expectation, especially for some of our more experienced curlers, saying, like, you're going to play with a bunch of newbies. It's going to be a mess out there. Let's just try to be positive and encouraging and help everyone grow. And they were all so fantastic. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Stephanie Thompson. I kind of like dropping her name because she was so helpful with this league. She is also a curler out of Unionville and also a competitive curler. And she has a business called Empowered Performance, where she is someone who trains people to be much better sweepers. And so she's out there telling people how to sweep better. Like, you could not have had a better coach on the ice to help them, like, really improve their sweeping, improve their form, improve, like, that communication element of sweeping. Talking about, don't forget, make your yell, tell the skip where the rock is. Mm-hmm. Have you changed your mind? We're halfway down. What's it doing now? Like, all of that positive reinforcement was so important. And then the other part is, of course, the skills part. Like, how do you teach the people? How do you get them onto the ice? So I know with our club, we have a very robust Learn to Curl program. We've got a lot of coaches, so we can have pretty small groups in that program. We've got a 4-week program, so it gives them a lot of time to learn, to digest, and sort of internalize those skills and come back and then get some refinement and then work on the next skill. So, like, it's a great program that works that way. But not every club has that. Some clubs have a shortage of coaches, so they have more people trying to listen into one coach. They can't get as much correction. And I've heard that some of the new clubs in the US are growing so fast that they don't have the experienced members to provide that level of experience. And some people are just going out there trying to curl based on what they saw on YouTube. And I said, great, here's one more resource that might help them, because, you know, our curlers got it through all those weekly emails. Might as well share it with the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the sections at the very beginning that I think is really important is about the culture of curling. And you make the point to say to everyone, hey, culture is important and we can be inclusive. We can bring everybody into the game. Talk about why that was so important to you.
Oh, that is, again, such an important thing to me, because, like, I've been described as basically a golden retriever with a favorite stick, and I want everyone to see my stick. It's like, hey, come here. This is my game. It's curling. Let's go. Let's have fun. Let's all come out and try it. And I want everybody to come and see curling and try it. And I kind of want everyone to have that kind of attitude, that, you know, people who might be new to Canada or to other countries, they're welcome in the sport too. Like, there's lots of room. We can build new clubs. We can have more sheets of ice. You know, people who have all kinds of different, you know, various identities, whether they're sexual orientation identities, whether they're racialized, anything, like, none of that matters on the ice. We're all out there to have some fun, throw some rocks, you know, communicate back and forth in a very open and positive way. Hey, great shot. It's okay. You'll make the next one, even if it wasn't a great shot. And you know, I just want to bring that energy to the sport of curling. And I want other people to remember that, like, that energy is a communal thing. It's what we all do with each other, how we interact with each other. And so we can make the sport of curling a very positive thing by just being so positive to each other, being welcoming, helping new people come into the sport. And some things in our curling culture might have to change a tiny bit to enable some of that. So one thing in particular that I call out is our tradition of broom stacking. Broom stacking is a great idea, I believe, because we come together after the game. So it's not just about the competition, it's also about the camaraderie. We get to spend some time with our opponents, sitting across the table from them, chatting. But broom stacking traditionally also involves alcohol. And not everyone is comfortable with alcohol, not everyone's a drinker, and we just need to be open to the idea. Like, I myself am a teetotaler. I don't drink at those. I am okay if my opponent wants to drink, but not everyone who has a problem with alcohol is okay buying a drink for another person. And so sometimes we just have to be a little understanding that if someone says, I would rather not buy you an alcoholic drink, but I'm happy to hang out with you, that maybe we can be flexible and allow that to happen, even if tradition says that, yeah, you buy the winner buys the loser a drink.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's room for all sorts of ways to celebrate after the game that don't involve a beer. So I hear you on that.
Yeah, and I've done a total 180 in my life on this. That I used to think that the buying drinks back and forth was essential, but now I think we should get rid of it. Now I think that is mostly an Ontario and East thing. It doesn't exist out west, so we just need that to. Typically, things expand. Historically, things have expanded east to west. We need this to expand west to east across the country. In terms of the culture of it too, one of the great things about the sport is that it can be accessible to anyone, right? I've played a game against a team using wheelchairs. You have a whole section about delivering with a stick. So these are ways that really anybody can get out there. At the club where Scott and I, where we play, they haven't in the past couple of years, but used to host the Deaf Championship, the Canadian Deaf Championship. So you have all these events that the sport can be more inclusive than it has been in the past, which is great to see. But one of the big questions, and I'm wondering what you think, John, is how do we get that initial hook into people? Your enthusiasm and excitement is very clear and plain to see for the sport, but it can be difficult for people to make that first step into a building, get onto the ice. So in your experience, what is the best way just to get people to come out and try?
That is a challenge for sure, because it can be kind of intimidating to approach the building at all. Most curling clubs are kind of like windowless barns, right? That's where the ice is. Sometimes we'll have windows out in the warm area, but a lot of times it's this big imposing building on the street. Sometimes it's set back in a weird little area where we happen to be able to set up the barn. Sometimes it's closer to like the main street. So our particular club is on the traditional main street for Unionville, Ontario. So one thing that has been successful for us to get some people through the door is that Unionville has a number of different street festivals. And so we'll participate as a curling club in those, help get people to understand curling. In the summertime, when we don't have ice, we'll have street curling out there. In the wintertime, when we've got our local Santa Claus parade going on, we'll say, hey, parade's over. Do you want to come into the curling club for a half hour and chuck a rock and see what it's like? And that's part of it, is because the ice is, again, me and my favorite thing, but the ice is just such a magical thing. Like, to be able to slide as you're coming down and feel that sort of almost flying freedom feeling, and then to see how weird it is that you throw this stone, a slide, not like literally throw, but slide this big heavy stone down this sheet of ice, and it just like slowly makes its way all the way down, and then this trajectory turns. Like, the name comes from that really cool effect of the stone curls. It moves across the ice, and then you get to see that with your own eyes after you do it. And then some people get hooked, and not everyone does, but at least we tried.
Yeah, if you can, get one person hooked for every 10 that come in, it's a great day.
Yeah.
Even every 100, that's great. You've made one new curler. One new curler is better than none. So, John, you mentioned you're a physicist, and you do talk a bit about the physics of curling. I'm interested in how difficult it was to put that into writing. But being a physicist, you're probably better at communicating that than most people.
Well, the problem is that the physics of curling exists to drive physicists mad. So I just sort of let that frustration come out because there are a couple of published papers on the physics of curling, on the physics of sweeping, and how that can help extend. And there isn't a lot of like really hard graded agreement on how it works because it's so bananas that the rocks curl, and that even the direction that they curl is opposite. That if you try to like slide a um, glass down a bar with a rotation, it curls in the opposite direction of what the stone does on the ice. And so there's lots of theories about why that happens. There's so many different theories about why sweeping works. Like, we know it works. We've done enough tests with controlled settings. We've done enough tests, like all of us here on this podcast, I'm sure I've done at some point a test where you're like, is my sweeping actually carrying the rock very far? And then throwing a rock, try to throw in the same rock again with sweeping, see how far you can drag it. And we kind of hear like, oh, the pros can drag it 10 to 12 feet. And you're going to like, well, what? How far can I drag it? And so you try it and you see that it does indeed work. Like, sweeping works. But how does it work? Is it heating the ice up? It's a little piece of fabric rubbing across the ice. How much is it heating it? And it heats it a little. Is that enough to have that effect? And some physicists say yes. So anyway, we get into a little bit of that and some of the discourse, and just let that frustration flow through in terms of, I don't know, it's a capricious God and it's out to get us. And the center line is haunted, but then the rest of the ice will work this way. And
exactly.
Yeah, I'm curious to another thing that is kind of unknown about the sport is strategy. And you mentioned that there's strategy talk in here. One of the sections that I love is patience and ignoring shot rock, if that section. But it is one of the things that when it comes to strategy that's really hard to talk to people about is you always want to be, when you start, shot rock at the end of your shot every single time. So again, how do you try to write about these things that, I mean, Colleen Jones is still out there playing, and you got people who have been playing for 60, 70 years who still have these long strategy discussions, and there's discrepancies or differences on what the ideal strategy is, what you want to play in a given scenario. So how do you try to present some of these really broad ideas and themes when we have so many people across the country with vast experience, world championships, who don't necessarily agree on ideal strategy?
Yeah, and that's part of it, is that they're picking the ideal strategy is really hard. And you can have debates about what ideal even means, what your philosophy and approach to the game is. Are you more a defensive player? Are you more of an offensive player? But even just thinking that there are multiple options can really get someone going, especially if they're a new skip. And that idea of like ignoring shot rock is one that I find I've talked to a lot of people who are just trying out skipping for the first time, because your focus, like, at the end of the end, the thing that's going to count is shot rock and hopefully any others that you've got closer to the button than any of the opponent's stones. And so, of course, your whole focus immediately goes to that shot rock. But it's not always the best idea to immediately play to shot rock. You can give yourself some better options by sometimes setting up a guard or playing to the wings, or even just starting to think about these other options. Think about a shot or two ahead. Like, it's really hard to think like some of these really expert strategic minds. They can go 3 rocks or more ahead and sort of plan out the game. But that's really hard to do at the recreational level, especially because you kind of don't know what shots you're going to get. But to even think that you don't immediately have to go after shot rock, that, remember, shot rock is there now. It might not be there later, and you don't necessarily have to deal with it right now. You can perhaps, especially if you've got hammer, you can go after something later. You can set yourself up with something else. And then maybe the opponent will ignore it, and then that'll help set you up for a bundle, because maybe they'll be focused on shot rock. So instead of trying to deal with that rock that you just put in the wings, they'll try to set up a guard. Oh, if they miss their guard, now you can make that hit. And then instead of just sitting the one in shot in place of the other team's rock that was just shot, now you've got 2 because you threw that one to the wings in the last run.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I always think that like playing a more simple strategy when you're at the rec level is always better. Because if you try to play the way the pros play, you don't make the same shots that they do. So, what looked like a surefire strategy at the start of the end didn't work out because you didn't make any of the shots. So, yeah, I find, and in February and March, the games tend to get a little more complex at the club as people are watching curling on TV every day and they want to try new things. But no, keeping it simple, pretty good.
Yeah, and I absolutely. I think the sport it is what you make of it, right? If you want to go out there and make it really complicated and try fun, crazy shots. My roommate, when I was in second year, hadn't really played. Scott played a lot more growing up than I did. I knew the rules, so I was the third, and we had two guys who had never played before. And my roommate, who was the skip, played competitively. He wanted the three of us who didn't really know what we were doing because he wanted to try crazy shots on the Wednesday night. Right, that's why we were there. And so the sport is really what you make of it. The games are what you make of it. And I think the main theme that really comes through when you go through the book is it's a great sport. Have fun with it. And here's ways that you can improve your performance. But what does come through very clearly is that what you're presenting is a recreational activity for people to come out, enjoy it, have a good time, build community, and just really enjoy the sport for what it is. And that's, for as much as like the tips and the ideas in this book are great, that's the theme, I think, that runs right through it.
Yeah, I try to pour my love of the sport into the pages and hope that comes back out to the reader, and hope that they're going to read it and immediately run out and join their club.
So, John, we can trust you obviously on the science, given that you're a physicist, but maybe the biggest question of all, based on the photos, you are a lefty.
I am a lefty, and that is going.
So how can we trust you on any of these technical things?
Exactly.
You're doing it all backwards.
I know, and I have another friend who's a lefty who read an early version of the book, and she was just like, "Oh, this is great! I love that there's finally pictures of a lefty out there." And so that maybe will also help complement some of the content that's out there. So again, if you talk about like Jamie Sinclair's channel, she's a righty. So if you're watching all that and you're a lefty, you've got to mirror that in your mind. Well, now you can look at me and see what the lefty side looks like, and then compare that to how the righties do it.
That's true. That's really good. Yeah. One final thought from me. I'm really happy that there's a little section about speed of play. If you've heard our podcast at all, you know that's a real bugaboo. So, if people take one thing out of this book, I'm going to say it's the speed of play section.
Yeah. There's always announcements. I think at every Bonspiel I've ever been to, every club I've ever played in, at the start of a season, it's always, if you're slow, you know who you are, pick up the pace. And I think that comes down to beginners too, is being taught that be ready to play and keep the flow of the game going. To me, that's one of the biggest etiquette things, and just enjoyment of the sport. Standing around in a cold arena is not that much fun, right? We're there to play the game, not to stand around.
Yeah, and to stand around, and also to like slow someone else down. Like, it's one thing if you're a little slow getting into the hack, but if you forget that you're standing on the center line and they can't see their skip and they have to wait for you to realize that you're in the wrong spot, and that can be a little bit frustrating. And one thing that I've seen other people do the math too, but I haven't seen in our announcements from the club quite as much, is like just doing the math of what speed of play means, because it doesn't take very much of a delay before you've lost a whole end. It's only a couple of seconds per rock through the course of a whole game that adds up to missing an end if you've only got a 2-hour time slot at your club for your game. So just shaving just a couple of seconds off every single rock that your team and the opposing team as well is throwing makes a difference between getting 6 ends or 7 ends or 8 ends in your 2-hour time slot.
Yeah, and as I said last week, I did the math. It was like $2 a shot or whatever it is that you throw over the course of the year. So you want to, you're costing yourself money when you do this, when you play slow, for sure. But yeah, I think it's 4 or 5 seconds a shot. You're getting another end in every night. Yeah, if every player can do that. So, and it doesn't sound like a lot, but yeah, when you add it up over the course of 16 shots per end,
and it's only little things that make the difference there sometimes. Like, yeah, sometimes you got someone staring off into the clouds and they don't even realize it's their shot. But even just little things like having your gripper off already so that you can immediately get into the hack rather than, oh, it's my shot. Now I take my gripper off and now I start to get into the hack. If you've already got some of that covered while you're able to cover it and the other team is throwing, then things will speed up.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and even as a skip too, I play third, and I say, like, if they're throwing a guard and it's clear we got a draw, all right, like, let's talk about where we're going to put the broom and what the speed's going to be. Let's talk about that while they're throwing. Let's not wait for the rock to come to rest. If they miss and something weird happens, sure, we can chat. But if they're within 10 feet of where they want to be, this is what our shot's going to be. So those sorts of little things that you can pick up as time goes by just really makes the experience more fun and what is already a fun sport.
And I can't remember if I actually included that tip, because that's an excellent one, which is, if you're relatively new to playing back end, is to think about basically those two scenarios when the other team is throwing. If they completely miss their shot, what are you going to throw? And if their draw turns into a guard or goes right through the house, and you have basically the same situation then in front of you, what would you want to throw? And if they make their shot as called, and hopefully you saw what they're planning, and then what's going to happen next is, they hit this rock, or they put that guard up, or they made that draw. If they make it as they called, what would you do then? You don't have to wait until the rock is there and they actually throw it to start to think about what you might do. Really, the only time you should really need to think about it after the rocks have come to the stop is if something surprising happened. So if they miss completely, or if they make their shot, you should just be ready to put the room down. You've already thought it through in your head. And then it's if that third thing happens where it was like a near miss and then the rocks are all in weird places, that you might need to take a minute to think now.
Yeah. And it helps with performance too, right? If you're locked into your shot, you know what you're going to do, then once you're locked in, it makes it that much easier. Rather, if you're going down to the other end, you're still waffling, or you're in the hack and you don't know what you want to throw, or if you're not confident in the shot, you're never going to make it. So, these things all work together. So,
exactly.
So John, we've lauded the book, and I think rightfully so. It's a really wonderful thing that you've done, that you've put together. If people want their own copy of it, what's the best way for them to pick a copy up and share it with their friends?
So whatever way is most convenient for them, it's on sale at quite a number of places. So they can buy it through the various big ebook or print book retailers. Amazon in Canada, Indigo and Kobo are selling the ebook. Indigo should get the print book, although as at the time that we're recording it, it's not listed for pre-order yet, but it should be there soon. Within the US, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, etc. And then I've also got a little web store set up through my own website where if they want to buy directly from me, they can do that, and ebook and print there as well. And if they want a signed copy, not that my signature is worth a whole lot, if they order it directly through me, I can sign the book before dropping it in the mail. But unfortunately, because of international shipping, I can only do that for Canadian orders.
Okay, and we'll put a link down in the show notes directly to John's site. We like all those other sites, but if you don't have to pay the extra fee to them, that's just a win-win, really.
Yeah, well, really, it's whatever's most convenient for the reader. The margin difference is not that much different that it's going to matter to me. I want it to be convenient for the reader. Anyway, it's curlingbeginners.ca.
All right. We'll link to that below again. Curling for Beginners and Improvers is the book. John Robertson, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. You guys have a great night.
All right. So there you have it, our chat with John Robertson. And we will link to the book below, as I said, and to his socials. So check the show notes to follow along with everything he's got going on and pick up a copy of the book. Scott, I really enjoyed that discussion. Wish I sounded better in it, but John, obviously a passionate guy, really into the sport. And if you pick up the book, you will see that, like the way he sounds, the way he talks about the sport, that's how he writes about the sport as well.
Yeah, and his writing style is very approachable. I would say it's done with a lot of humor and accessibility. So I encourage anybody who's just starting to learn and is a bit on the fence about curling, take a look at the book, pick up your copy, and try to learn a little bit more before you go out to your next session. And I think you'll find that you'll have that much better of a time by understanding a little bit more what's happening.
100%. So again, we thank John for his time. And as I said, we'll link to everything in the show notes. Scott, before we go this week, do want to acknowledge that the PointsBet Invitational did happen. And we do have a couple teams that are $50,000 richer. On the women's side, it was Rachel Homan beating Kayla Skrillick in the final. Men's side, Mike McEwen beats Brad Gushu in the finals. A couple of surprises, perhaps, on the way. Team McDonald's the junior team out of Manitoba. They have a great run, beating Matt Dunstone and Kevin Cooey on the way to the semifinal, losing to Brad Gushu, and gave Brad Gushu everything he could handle there in the semifinal. You also had a big upset on the women's side. Team McNutt beat Team Anderson in the opening round. So we did have some upsets, which was pretty exciting. Kayla Skrlik beating Chelsea Carey, the number 2 ranked team along the way. They were the highest ranked team to ever make the final. I guess the lowest ranked team. What is it, Scott? Are they the lowest ranked team or the highest ranked? Like, it's the highest number, but the lowest rank.
I think they call them the highest seed, lowest seed. I don't know.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
The
only double-digit seed to ever make it to the final of this event. They were the 10 seed. So pretty good week for them, certainly. And I think overall, Scott, the PointsBet, we'll see what the future of this event is through the quad. I don't know if Calgary is the right place for this. They love that arena. It's a great venue for sure.
Yeah.
I'm just not sure what the audience is in late September for this event in terms of in person. I think Brad Gushu might not like this based on the pan-continental content or feedback last time. Maybe put this in a larger club setting. I don't know.
I think for the players, part of the appeal of this event is playing on arena ice conditions, and it also gives those invited teams the chance to play in those sort of conditions that they might not always get to play in. So I sort of disagree with you on that standpoint, that it probably should be in a rink, but having to then traverse the entire country for a lot of those teams to go play in the Grand Slam this week, maybe they could get the scheduling a little bit adjusted a little bit for that.
Yeah, so the Grand Slam is in PEI this week, correct?
Yeah, and Team Holman, as of tonight, had their first loss on the year. So they're down to the B side. But some good curling going on. And Sean, this is all available to stream as well.
Yeah, so for the first time, games before Thursday are available to be viewed. The Grand Slam of Curling did make that announcement, and all the games are available for free streaming before Thursday. And in the future events, they didn't announce if for future events those streams will continue to be free or if that's just for this first event, the Tour Challenge. But they'll all be available still. So some of the initial feedback was good, not great. There were some technical hiccups on Tuesday, but that happens, no big deal. So hopefully they can get all that sorted out with the future events and what happened today. But great to see the slams making some changes. I will just note that Brad Gushu, in an article by Gregory Strong from the Canadian Press, is quoted as saying that in the past 5 or 10 years, the Grand Slams have perhaps gotten a little stagnant. And I remember getting yelled at for saying that. So I don't know.
Getting yelled at by Brad Gushu?
Not by Brad Gushu, no. but yeah, so it's nice to see that some new energy is into the slams. Mm-hmm. And we'll see what some of the bigger changes are forthcoming for them. Scott, in terms of strategy and the results on the ice, I just wanted to note that in the game on Sunday against Kayla Skrlik, there was a point in the game where Rachel Homan was up by 3, I believe, without the hammer. And she was sitting 3, and the team at the other end, Sarah, Emma, and Tracy, wanted to throw a guard. And, they're up by 2. So it's 5, or by 3. It's 5-3 in the 7th end. And they're sitting 3, and they say, let's throw a guard. I think it was on Emma's first or probably Emma's second. Rachel's looking, maybe let's peel a corner guard, keep it open. And the rest of the team says, no, let's throw a guard. They throw a guard. 10 minutes later, they've stolen 3 points. Mm-hmm. And this is something that we've talked about before. And let's be very upfront. They're the best team in the world. They lost 7 games last year. Any criticism of them is nitpicky at best.
Yes.
But this team sometimes, I feel like, plays more ends than they need to because they're so much better than everybody else. If they were slightly more aggressive at points, they could get off the ice earlier because that's just how much better they are.
Yeah, sometimes they give the other team too much credit, right?
Yeah.
They say, oh, they're good. Like, they can make these shots. Let's peel to make it harder for them. But, like, you'd really make it harder for them if you made amazing shots.
Yeah.
So just do that. And you're right. That was sort of a really good example of, what we've talked about with Team Homan. And it's, we saw last year, they sort of came into their own, had an amazing year, and are just brimming with confidence right now. And I think the confidence is where that shot comes from more than a strategy change. It's a confidence in themselves, knowing what they're going to do, no matter what the other team does. So yeah, this is great to see. And they're going to be a tough team to beat all season long.
Yep. Breaking news there. Really, really good. So there you have it. So there was curling on the TV last week, and there's going to be curling on the TV this weekend, and we'll be watching, and we'll talk about it when we join you next week. So to be there for that, do subscribe if you have not yet, wherever you get your shows, likes, rates, comments, all that stuff. Helps other people find the show, keeps us growing. You can follow us on the socials at Game of Stones Pod, Game of Stones Podcast on Facebook, though, GameOfStonesPod.com, past episodes, plus a link to the merch. And if you want to let us know what you want to hear on the show, Game of Stones Podcast at gmail.com. Scott, we mentioned this to each other when we saw each other over the weekend. We're going to do a deeper dive into the broad rebranding that's going on across the sport. Mm-hmm. TSN, new intro package, new music. Just real quick, initial thoughts.
Change is hard.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's. I didn't really notice it that much on the open package, but between ends, it was kind of jarring. But that's something we want to talk about in a lot more detail. Not just TSN, but the Grand Slam of curling has rebranded, as has Curl Ontario, which was curling, the Ontario Curling Association, then went to Curl On, and now is Curling Ontario, I think.
We're very confused.
Yes. But, Scott, one day, hopefully, we'll be bouncing our great-grandchildren on our knees, telling them about the illustrious Curl On era of curling in this province.
Everyone is seeking to abbreviate.
Yeah.
And then now we totes don't dig their abbreves.
Yeah, I'm surprised they didn't do that thing where they just take out all the vowels.
Yeah.
CRL, like apostrophe N.
Curlin.
Yeah. So we'll talk about that in more detail. But yeah, TSN has changed up. I'll be interested to see what if anything Sportsnet does.
Yeah.
For the coverage now that they don't own the event anymore. Does that change the presentation, or does the Grand Slam, have they requested changes to the graphics package, the music, those sorts of things, those ancillary parts of the broadcast? So it'll be interesting to see that when that comes on the air tomorrow.
Yeah, and I'm sure it'll be a full facelift, so looking forward to it.
Yes. So like I said, everybody, enjoy the curling this weekend. We'll be back with you next week. But until then, keep those brooms on the ice and don't dump that intern.
Make the final